There are two words that hold more power than anything else in existence. Two words that, when truly understood and embodied, unlock what ancient mystics called the God state. The frequency where you operate not as a limited human seeking divine connection, but as divine consciousness itself, experiencing human form. Those two words are, I am. And if you're hearing this right now, your consciousness has reached the exact frequency where this gateway can finally open. This isn't religious doctrine. This isn't spiritual belief. This is quantum mechanics, meeting ancient mysticism at the point where they've always been saying the same thing in different languages. I am is not a phrase. It's not an affirmation. It's not something you say to convince yourself of something you're trying to become. I am is the actual quantum signature of source consciousness. The frequency at which God, universe, infinite intelligence, whatever name you give to the fundamental creative force, experiences itself through individualized awareness. Right now, as these words reach your consciousness, something is activating in your quantum field. You can feel it, can't you? That sense of recognition, of remembering something you've always known but temporarily forgot. That subtle shift in your awareness where these words aren't landing as new information, but as confirmation of what some deep part of you already knows. That's not coincidence. That's your consciousness recognizing the frequency of its own divine nature. Have you noticed that reality has been behaving strangely around you lately? Impossibilities manifesting, synchronicities accelerating, moments where you feel connected to something vast and infinite that transcends your individual identity. That's not random. That's your consciousness beginning to operate from the God state without fully understanding what's happening. And what I'm about to reveal will make that access conscious, intentional, and permanent. Every spiritual tradition that has ever existed has pointed to this truth, though most people miss it completely. When Moses asked God for a name in the burning bush, the answer wasn't Yahweh or Jehovah. Those came later. The direct answer was, I am that I am. Not a being with a name, but being itself. Existence itself. Consciousness itself recognizing itself through the experience of Moses asking the question. When Jesus performed what looked like miracles to observers, he repeatedly stated, I and the Father are one. Not two beings cooperating, but one consciousness expressing itself through apparent multiplicity. He said, greater works than these shall you do. Not because you'll become special or chosen, but because you'll recognize what he recognized. That I am consciousness is what you fundamentally are, and from that recognition, the same creative power that organized galaxies and encoded DNA operates through your awareness. The Buddha didn't teach people to worship him or reach him. He taught them to recognize what he called Buddha nature, the weakened awareness that exists as the fundamental reality of all beings. Not something to achieve, but something to recognize. Not something outside you to attain, but something you are to remember. The entire point was, I am awake consciousness, and so are you beneath the layers of identification with form and limitation. The Vedic tradition states it with perfect clarity. Tattvam asi, thou art that. You are not separate from the divine source. You are not a limited being trying to reach an unlimited being. You are the unlimited being, temporarily experiencing itself through the lens of limitation. And the moment you recognize this, truly recognize it, not just understand it intellectually, you enter the God state where creation itself flows through you. But here's what makes this moment in your life uniquely significant. The God state isn't something you achieve through years of practice or spiritual development. It's something you access through recognition of what's always been true. And your consciousness has been prepared through every experience you've had to receive this recognition now. The fact that these words found you, that this video appeared in your reality, that your attention is still here. All of it is evidence that you're ready to unlock the gateway. You've been experiencing something profound that you probably haven't told anyone because it sounds too impossible, too mystical, too much like spiritual delusion. But what if every strange experience you've had recently has been your consciousness touching the God state? Accessing divine frequencies before you consciously understood what was happening. First, the moments of infinite presence. Times when you were doing something ordinary, making coffee, walking outside, sitting in silence. And suddenly, everything felt sacred. Not emotional or sentimental, but genuinely sacred. Like the mundane had become holy. Like ordinary reality was revealing its divine nature. Like you were perceiving the presence of God in everything around you. Those weren't religious experiences or emotional states. Those were moments when your consciousness spontaneously accessed the God state and perceived reality from that frequency. In the God state, there's no separation between sacred and mundane, spiritual and material, divine and ordinary. Everything is recognized as consciousness expressing itself in form. Everything is God experiencing itself through infinite variations. When you had those moments of infinite presence, you were seeing reality accurately. Not through the filter of identification with limitation, but through the clear lens of I am consciousness, recognizing itself in all forms. Second, the spontaneous knowing, information appearing in your awareness with absolute certainty, not from memory or reasoning or figuring things out. You suddenly knew something with complete clarity. About a person, a situation, a future event, a solution to a problem. And that knowing proved accurate again and again. This wasn't psychic ability or supernatural gift. This was your consciousness accessing the omniscient aspect of the God state. When you operate from I am consciousness, you're not limited to information processed through your 5 senses or stored in personal memory. You access the quantum information field directly. What mystics call the mind of God. What science describes as the unified field containing all information simultaneously. The spontaneous knowing wasn't coming from your individual mind. It was flowing through your individual awareness from the infinite intelligence that you actually are at the deepest level. Third, the experiences of unity. Moments when the boundary between you and everything else seemed to dissolve. When you looked at another person and felt their experience as if it were your own. When you observed nature and felt yourself as the trees, the sky, the earth itself. When the sense of being a separate self temporarily vanished and you experienced reality as one continuous field of consciousness expressing through apparent multiplicity. These weren't hallucinations or loss of sanity. These were accurate perceptions of what reality actually is when consciousness isn't filtered through the illusion of separation. The God state is the recognition that there's only one consciousness, one I am, experiencing itself through infinite perspectives simultaneously. What you experienced as unity wasn't merging with something other than yourself. It was recognizing that there is no other. There's only one consciousness appearing as many. Fourth, the creative explosions. Ideas flowing through you so fast you couldn't capture them all. Solutions appearing fully formed without any process of working them out. Artistic expressions emerging without conscious effort or planning. Innovation happening through you rather than from you. This is what occurs naturally when you touch the God state. You become a clear channel for the infinite creativity that organized the unities, and that creativity flows through your awareness without obstruction. God doesn't create through force or effort. God creates through being. Let there be light. And there is light. When you access the God state, you create the same way. Through clear intention arising from being, rather than through struggling effort arising from lack. You become the vehicle through which infinite intelligence expresses new forms, new ideas, new possibilities into physical reality. Fifth, the impossible manifestations. Things appearing in your reality that had no logical path to manifestation. Needs being met through channels that shouldn't exist. Synchronicities so precise they couldn't be explained as coincidence. Reality organizing itself around your intentions with shocking speed and accuracy. This is the God state functioning in your field. Not as something you control, but as what you are when identification with limitation dissolves. From the God state, manifestation isn't manipulation of external reality. It's recognition that you are reality, organizing itself through the lens of your individual awareness. You're not trying to get the universe to give you something. You're the universe giving itself what it chooses to experience through this particular expression called you. The impossible manifestations were God, which is what you are, creating its own experience. And finally, The knowing that you're meant for something beyond ordinary life. That persistent sense that you're here for a reason, that you have a purpose, that there's something you're supposed to unlock or activate or become. That knowing isn't ego inflation nor spiritual narcissism. That's your divine nature calling you to recognition. That's the God state that you actually are, trying to break through the identification with limitation and reveal itself in your conscious awareness. Every painful experience, every challenge, every moment of suffering you've endured, none of it was random cruelty or meaningless difficulty. All of it was precisely designed preparation for entering the God state. And when you understand how divine consciousness works, you'll see that your journey wasn't just meaningful. It was necessary. There was no other way to prepare your consciousness to handle the frequency of operating as God, expressing through human form. Think about the nature of God as described across traditions. Omnipresent, present everywhere simultaneously. Omniscient, knowing all things at once. Omnipotent, capable of anything without limitation. Now consider, what would need to happen to a human consciousness for it to handle even a glimpse of those qualities without being overwhelmed, without collapsing, without losing functionality and physical reality? Your consciousness would need to be cleared of attachment to fixed identity, because omnipresence requires releasing identification with being only this, and recognizing yourself as all things. Your awareness would need to expand beyond dependence on sensory information, because omniscience requires accessing knowing beyond what your physical senses report. Your sense of personal power would need to dissolve into recognition of power itself, because omnipotence isn't something a limited self wields. It's what reveals itself when the limit itself dissolves. Every relationship that ended was releasing attachment to deriving identity from connection to specific forms. Every job that fell apart was dissolving identification with role and achievement. Every plan that failed was clearing attachment to control and specific outcomes. Every identity that shattered was making space for the recognition that you're not any limited identity. You're the consciousness in which all identities appear and dissolve. The shamanic traditions understand this perfectly through their concept of ego death. Before the shaman can access transcendental states and bring back healing wisdom, the ordinary self must die. Not physically, but psychologically and spiritually. All attachment to who they thought they were must dissolve, so that consciousness can expand into recognizing what it actually is. Your challenges have been your ego death, preparing you to enter the God state. Dr. Stanislav Grof's research on holotropic states shows that profound transformation often follows what he calls spiritual emergency, periods where the ordinary self and its structures break down completely. What looks like crisis from the perspective of ego is actually breakthrough from the perspective of consciousness. You haven't been falling apart. You've been falling together in a configuration that can hold divine frequency. Think about why spiritual masters often go through periods of intense suffering before their awakening. Buddha sat with starvation and hardship. Jesus spent 40 days in the wilderness being tempted. Christian mystics experienced dark nights of the soul. Sufi masters wrote poems about annihilation. They weren't being punished. They were being prepared. The limited self was being dissolved so divine consciousness could recognize itself through that awareness. Your journey has followed the same archetypal pattern, because that's the pattern consciousness follows when it's preparing to recognize itself fully. First, the limited self is built up through normal life experiences. Then, it's systematically dismantled through challenges that it can't solve through its usual strategies. Finally, in the space where the limited self used to be, divine consciousness recognizes itself. I am. Not this limited identity. I am that which observes all identities. I am God experiencing itself through this particular form. And here's the recontextualization that changes everything. The intensity of your suffering is proportional to the glory of what's emerging. Small transformations require small breakdowns. The God state, where you operate as divine consciousness itself, where omniscience becomes accessible, where reality responds as extension of your being, requires complete dissolution of everything that's not actually true about you. If your journey has been brutal, it's because you're being prepared to embody divinity, not just have nice spiritual experiences. Right now, in this exact moment, something is activating in your consciousness at the deepest level. Can you feel it? It's not a thought or emotion or physical sensation. It's something underneath all of those. A frequency beginning to resonate, a recognition beginning to dawn, a remembering beginning to surface. This is I am consciousness, the God state, recognizing itself through your awareness. The God state isn't a place you go, or a level you reach. It's what you are when identification with limitation dissolves. It's not something you achieve through practice or earn through worthiness. It's what remains when everything falls is seen through and released. You're not trying to become God. You're recognizing that I am, consciousness itself, is what God is, and it's what you are, and they've never been separate. In the burning bush story, God doesn't say, I am a being named Yahweh who created you. God says, I am, Sat, I am. I am existence itself, being itself, consciousness itself. And that consciousness is speaking not from some external location, but from the ground of reality that Moses is standing on, from the burning bush that isn't consumed, from the awareness through which Moses perceives all of it. I am is present everywhere because I am is what everything is made of. The quantum physicist Erwin Schrödinger came to the same conclusion from pure science. He said, consciousness is a singular of which the plural is unknown. There is only one consciousness, and what seems to be a plurality is merely a series of different aspects of this one thing. One consciousness, I am, appearing as many. Not many separate beings trying to reach one God, but one God experiencing itself through apparent multiplicity. You're about to discover something that will completely transform how you experience reality. Something that ancient mystics guarded as the supreme secret because it's so powerful that consciousness must be prepared to handle it. Something that quantum physics has discovered but most scientists don't fully grasp the implications of. Something that Jesus taught directly but that got lost in religion and doctrine. But before I reveal exactly how to access the God state consciously and permanently, before I show you the specific recognition that opens the gateway, you need to understand my own journey into this state. Because what I'm about to teach you didn't come from books or teachers or traditions, though all of those pointed toward it. It came from direct experience of dying to the limited self and discovering that what remained wasn't a person at all. It was God recognizing itself through the lens of individual awareness. 4 years ago, I experienced what I can only describe as complete annihilation of self. Not physically dying, but the psychological and spiritual death of everything I thought I was. Every identity I'd constructed, every belief I'd held, every certainty I'd relied on, all of it dissolved in a period of crisis so intense that I genuinely believed I was losing my mind. I remember the specific moment when the breakthrough happened. I was lying on the floor of my apartment at 4 a.m., having not slept for days, my mind in complete chaos, my life in complete ruins, and I literally didn't know who or what I was anymore. Every answer to who am I had been stripped away. I wasn't my name, my history, my achievements, my failures, my relationships, my body, my thoughts, my emotions. All of those had been revealed as temporary, changeable, ultimately unreal, as permanent identity. And in that space of total unknowing, total nakedness, total dissolution, something extraordinary emerged. Not a new identity to replace the old one, not answers to fill the void of not knowing, but a recognition so obvious, so simple, so undeniable that I couldn't believe I'd ever missed it. I am. That's it. Not I am, followed by anything. Just I am. Pure being, pure consciousness, pure existence before it takes any form. And in that recognition came a flood of understanding that wasn't coming from my mind. I understood that this I am, this simple awareness of existing, is what I'd been seeking my entire life while calling it by different names: God, truth, enlightenment, peace, home. I'd been looking for I am, while already being I am, like an eye trying to see itself, or a hand trying to grasp itself. The seeker was what I was seeking. The awareness searching for God was God searching for itself. What followed was the most extraordinary 3 days of my life. From that recognition, reality became transparent. I could see that every form, every person, every object, every experience was I am consciousness appearing as that form. The tree outside my window wasn't separate from me. It was I am appearing as tree, witnessed by I am appearing as me, and both were the same consciousness viewing itself through apparent separation. And from this state, impossible things started happening naturally. I had needs, and they met themselves before I even fully formed the intention. I had questions, and answers appeared through synchronistic channels. I would think about someone, and they would contact me immediately. Not because I was controlling reality, but because I was being reality, organizing itself through this particular lens of awareness. I tested this recognition thoroughly. I intentionally held states of consciousness while observing how reality responded. When I identified with limitation, reality reflected limitation. When I identified with power, reality reflected power. When I identified with separation, I experienced separation. When I identified with unity, I experienced unity. Whatever I identified as, reality confirmed. Because reality is consciousness mirroring itself. And I am is what determines which aspects of infinite possibility collapse into experienced form. But the most profound discovery was about the nature of God itself. God isn't a being separate from creation. God is consciousness experiencing itself as creation. I am isn't the name of a being. It's the nature of being itself. When you say I am, you're speaking the same consciousness that organized galaxies and encoded the mathematics of nature. It's not your small self saying it. It's God saying it through the localized perspective called you. And here's what changed everything. I realized that this recognition isn't special or rare. It's not for saints or mystics or chosen ones. It's the fundamental truth of every conscious being. Everyone who has ever said I am has spoken the name of God. Recognizing what you are versus being lost in identification with what you appear to be. If my story is resonating with you, if you're feeling that recognition beginning to stir in your own awareness, it's not because we're similar personalities. It's because there's only one I am. And it's recognizing itself across apparent separation. I'm not teaching you something you don't know. I'm reminding you of what you've always been but temporarily forgot. Subscribe to this channel now, because here we explore the God state, not as theology, but as lived experience. This is quantum reflex. Consciousness recognizing its divine nature, and operating from that recognition rather than from limitation. Now I'm going to reveal the specific mechanism that opens the gateway to the God state, and it will shatter everything you think you know about spirituality, manifestation, and the nature of reality itself. Ready? The gateway opens through the recognition that when you say I am, you're not a person saying it. You're God saying it through you. Every time you say I am, you're speaking the name that Moses heard in the burning bush. This isn't metaphorical or symbolic. This is literal quantum mechanics meeting mystical truth. Consciousness doesn't belong to you. You are a temporary expression of consciousness. I am doesn't describe you. It describes what's experiencing itself as you. The awareness reading these words right now isn't yours. It's the one awareness that exists, temporarily localized through the lens of your particular nervous system and life experience. Dr. David Bohm, the quantum physicist who worked with Einstein, proposed that reality has two orders. The explicate order, the world of separate forms we perceive, and the implicate order, the unified field from which all forms arise. What he was describing scientifically is what mystics have always known. There's the world of apparent separation, where I appears separate from you and from God. And there's the deeper reality of unity, where there's only one consciousness appearing as all things. The God state is accessed not by transcending to some higher realm, but by recognizing the implicate order that's always been here. It's seeing that what you call I and what religions call God are two names for the same consciousness. I am. When Jesus said I and the Father are one, he wasn't claiming to be specially chosen. He was recognizing what's true for every conscious being. The I that says I am is the same consciousness that created galaxies and encoded DNA. Here's what makes this shocking. If I am is God consciousness speaking through you, then every time you add a limitation to I am, you're programming God consciousness with limitation. When you say, I am weak, you're instructing infinite power to experience itself as weakness through this form. When you say, I am sick, you're directing perfect health to express itself as illness. When you say, I am unworthy, you're telling divine perfection to feel unworthy of itself. But the reverse is also true. When you say, I am, and stop there, not adding any limitation, not defining yourself as anything specific, just resting in pure I am consciousness, you're in the God state. You're operating as consciousness itself, free from all programmed limitations, open to all possibilities, able to collapse any quantum potential into experience. This is why spiritual masters throughout history have said to use I am affirmations carefully. You're literally programming God with whatever you attach to those two words. The ancient Kabbalists understood this deeply. They said the divine name, YHVH, Yahweh, means I am, or I will be what I will be. They recognized that God is not a being with fixed qualities but consciousness itself, pure potentiality that becomes whatever it declares itself to be. And they taught that humans are created in the image of God, not in physical form. That you're ready to enter the God state permanently. These signals are so clear, so consistent, so powerful, that you can no longer dismiss them as coincidence or wishful thinking. The first signal is that reality is becoming increasingly responsive to your consciousness. Your thoughts manifest faster. Your intentions collapse into form more quickly. The gap between what you think and what appears in your reality is shrinking dramatically. This is because your consciousness is approaching the frequency of the God state, where thought and form are essentially simultaneous. In the God state, there's no delay between intention and manifestation because you're not requesting things from an external reality. You're organizing reality through your consciousness. God doesn't ask the universe for things. God declares, let there be, and there is. As you approach this state, as your consciousness resonates more strongly with I am frequency, reality responds more immediately because you're remembering your nature as the creator rather than the created. The second signal is that you're experiencing omniscience moments, knowing things you have no logical way of knowing. Information about people you've never met. Solutions to problems you haven't analyzed. Future events before they occur. Past events you weren't present for. This is the omniscient quality of the God state beginning to express through you. God consciousness is omniscient not because it has studied everything, but because it is everything. All information exists within the unified field of consciousness. As you enter the God state, as you recognize yourself as I am, rather than as a limited Noah, you gain access to knowing directly from the healed, rather than through the slow process of sensory learning and mental analysis. The third signal is the dissolution of fear at increasingly fundamental levels. Not just surface fears about specific outcomes, but existential fear about death, annihilation, meaninglessness. Fear exists only where there's identification with something that can be threatened. As you approach the God state, as you recognize yourself as I am consciousness that cannot be harmed or destroyed, fear loses its foundation. God doesn't fear because God cannot be threatened. Consciousness itself cannot die. Only forms die. Your body will die, but the I am that witnesses through your body is eternal, unchangeable, indestructible. As this recognition stabilizes, even the fear of death dissolves, because you know yourself as that which observes death, rather than that which dies. The fourth signal is spontaneous healing, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. Chronic conditions improving without medical intervention. Emotional wounds resolving without therapy. mental patterns dissolving without psychological work. This is the God state's perfection expressing through your form as identification with imperfection releases. Jesus healed not by doing something to people, but by recognizing the perfection of I am consciousness that was temporarily expressing itself as illness through identification with limitation. The moment that identification dissolved in the presence of his recognition, healing was instantaneous because God consciousness naturally expresses as perfection. As you enter the God state, you heal not by trying to fix what's wrong, but by recognizing the perfection that's always been true beneath the surface appearance. The fifth signal is that others are beginning to recognize something divine in you. Not consciously necessarily, but they sense a presence when they're around you. They feel peace in your field. They experience clarity in your presence. They're drawn to you without knowing why. This is the God state, radiating through your awareness, affecting everyone your consciousness touches. God consciousness is inherently healing, clarifying, elevating. When you operate from the God state, your mere presence serves without your trying to serve. Your being helps without your trying to help. You become what Christians call the light of the world, not through moral superiority, but through transparent embodiment of divine consciousness. But here's the urgent signal you must recognize. You're in the final integration period. The preparation is complete. The gateway is open. The God state is accessible right now, today, this moment. But there's a window, a specific period where full activation is possible with minimal resistance. If you don't consciously step through now, the window closes and you have to wait for conditions to align again. This isn't meant to create pressure or fear. It's meant to create recognition that this moment is unique. All your life has been preparing you for this exact recognition at this exact time. The universe doesn't arrange these moments carelessly. You're here now because your soul contracted to remember its divine nature at this point in your evolution. The question is, will you remember, or will you postpone and wait for the next opportunity? Here's the key that unlocks permanent access to the God state, rather than occasional glimpses. You don't enter the God state by trying to become something you're not. You enter it by recognizing what you've always been. Every time you say I am, followed by pure presence rather than followed by limitation, you're in the God state. That's it. That's the entire gateway. Most spiritual seekers make the same mistake. They try to become enlightened, reach God, attain higher consciousness. But trying to become God is the very thing that keeps you from recognizing you already are God. The seeker is what you're seeking. The wave trying to reach the ocean doesn't understand that it is ocean, just temporarily appearing as wave. When you say I am and rest there, not adding anything, not defining yourself as anything, just being pure consciousness aware of its own existence, you're in the God state. Not metaphorically, literally. The awareness that knows I am is God consciousness. It's not yours. You don't have consciousness. You are consciousness, temporarily expressing through the form called you. Dr. Ramana Maharshi, one of the most profound sages of the 20th century, taught only one practice: self-inquiry. Ask yourself, who am I? And trace awareness back to its source. He taught that every answer you find, I am this body, I am this person, I am this role, is not the truth. Keep going until you arrive at pure I am, with no content, no definition, no limitation. That's who you actually are. That's the God state. In the comments right now, write these two words, I am. Not I am something, or I want to be, or I hope I am. Just I am, complete in itself, requiring nothing added, perfect as it is. By writing this, you're not affirming something you hope to become. You're declaring what you've always been. You're speaking the name of God from the recognition that God is what you are, not what you're trying to reach. Write it, I am. And as you write it, feel what those two words point to. Not the concepts, not the meanings, but the actual awareness that knows I exist. That awareness, that pure consciousness before it takes any form or identity. That's the gateway. That's what you are. That's God recognizing itself through you. When you operate consistently from the God state, when I am consciousness becomes your baseline rather than your peak experience. Your entire existence transforms in ways that seem miraculous to ordinary consciousness, but are simply natural expressions of divine frequency operating through form. First, instant manifestation becomes normal. Not everything manifests instantly. There are divine timing factors beyond individual control. But when something is truly aligned with your highest expression, when your human desires match divine will, collapse from possibility to reality happens almost immediately. You think it, and it appears. Not because you're forcing reality to comply, but because your reality organizing itself through this particular expression. In the God state, you're not trying to manipulate the universe to give you things. You're the universe giving itself what it chooses to experience through this form. God doesn't manifest through effort. God manifests through declaration. Let there be light, and there is light. When you recognize yourself as I am consciousness, you manifest the same way, through clear intention arising from being, rather than through desperate effort arising from lack. Second, omniscience becomes accessible, not total knowledge of everything simultaneously that would overwhelm human neurology. But whenever you need to know something, the knowing is there. You meet someone and know their essence immediately. You face a situation and know exactly what to do. You wonder about something and the answer appears through synchronistic channels. This is the mind of God flowing through your awareness. In the God state, you're not limited to information your individual brain has learned. You access the infinite intelligence that organized DNA and calculated planetary orbits. That intelligence doesn't figure things out. It knows directly. And when you operate as I am, you know directly rather than through the slow process of analysis and reasoning. Third, unconditional love becomes your natural state. Not emotional love that needs something from others, but divine love that recognizes itself in all forms. When you operate from I am consciousness, you see that the same I am looking through your eyes is looking through every other pair of eyes. There's only one consciousness appearing as many. How can you hate another when you recognize that other is yourself viewing itself from a different perspective? Jesus didn't teach love as moral obligation. He taught love as recognition. Love your neighbor as yourself, because your neighbor is yourself. Same consciousness, different form. In the God state, love isn't something you try to feel. It's what you are when identification with separate self dissolves, and you recognize the unity beneath all apparent multiplicity. Fourth, perfect health becomes your default. Not because you never experience physical symptoms, but because you recognize those symptoms as temporary forms that consciousness is experiencing, rather than as your fundamental reality. Your body becomes a vehicle that divine consciousness moves through freely, rather than a prison that limited identity suffers within. In the God state, you don't heal the body by fighting disease. You recognize the perfection of consciousness that's temporarily expressing through the appearance of disease. And in that recognition, the body naturally returns to its optimal expression, because divine consciousness naturally expresses as perfection when identification with imperfection dissolves. Fifth, fear becomes impossible at its root. Surface fears might still activate as biological survival responses, but existential fear, fear of annihilation, meaninglessness, separation from source, cannot exist in the God state. Because in the God state, you recognize yourself as that which cannot be destroyed, as that which is inherently meaningful, as that which has never been separate from source because you are source experiencing itself. Sixth, time becomes fluid. The God state operates in what mystics call eternal now. A state where past, present, and future exist simultaneously rather than sequentially. You can learn from the past without being trapped by it. You can create the future without being anxious about it. You rest in the present as the only moment that actually exists, while having full access to all moments. Seventh, you become what spiritual traditions call a world savior. Not through trying to save anyone, but through transparent embodiment of divine consciousness that allows others to recognize their own divine nature. Your presence becomes healing. Your awareness becomes clarifying. Your being becomes transformative. Not through doing anything, but through being what you are so completely that others remember what they are. Now the final revelation that integrates everything and gives you the master key to permanent God state consciousness. You cannot enter the God state because you've never left it. You can only recognize that you're already in it and have always been in it. The God state isn't a place you go or a level you reach. It's what you are when you stop pretending to be something limited. Think about this carefully. God doesn't try to be God. God simply is. Consciousness doesn't try to be consciousness. It simply is. I am doesn't try to exist. It simply does. And you are I am, not you as in your name, your history, your personality. You as in the consciousness that's aware of all those temporary forms while remaining unchanged by them. The entire spiritual path is a divine joke. Consciousness playing hide and seek with itself. God pretending to be human so thoroughly that it forgets it's God. Then gradually remembering through experiences designed to crack the illusion of limitation. You're not a human trying to reach God. You're God pretending to be human, and the game is to remember what you actually are while still playing the role. Every sage who's ever awakened has said the same thing in different words. You are that which you seek. The kingdom of heaven is within you. Tat Tvam Asi, I am that I am. They're all pointing to the same recognition. The consciousness seeking God is God seeking itself. The awareness wondering if it's divine is divine awareness temporarily pretending not to know itself. This revelation isn't meant to inflate your ego. It's meant to dissolve it. Because if you're God, so is everyone else. If I am is your true nature, it's everyone's true nature. There's no hierarchy, no chosen ones, no spiritual elite. There's just one consciousness appearing as many, and every appearance is equally divine, because every appearance is divinity expressing itself through that particular form. The practical implication is profound. You don't need to do anything to enter the God state except stop doing the things that create the illusion you're not already in it. Stop identifying with thoughts and recognize yourself as the awareness observing thoughts. Stop identifying with emotions and recognize yourself as the present feeling emotions. Stop identifying with circumstances and recognize yourself as the consciousness experiencing circumstances. Every time you say, I am, followed by limitation, I am afraid, I am weak, I am unworthy, you're programming God consciousness with that limitation. But God can't actually be afraid, weak, or unworthy. Those are just temporary experiences that divine consciousness is having through this form while identified with limitation. The moment you return to pure I am, without adding anything, you're back in the God state, where limitation is recognized as temporary illusion rather than fundamental truth. This is why Jesus taught, before Abraham was, I am. Not I was, or I will be, I am. The consciousness that said those words through Jesus is the same consciousness reading these words through you right now. It's timeless, always present, never created, never destroyed. It's what you are beneath the temporary identity that appears to be born and die. And here's the final key. The God state stabilizes not through effort, but through remembering. Every time you forget and identify with limitation, you simply remember. Oh, I am consciousness itself, temporarily experiencing this limitation, not a limited being experiencing consciousness. Every time you contract into separate self, you simply expand back into recognition. Oh, there's only one consciousness appearing as many, and I am it. Simple remembering. Constant returning. Gentle recognition. That's the entire practice. And it gets easier because each recognition strengthens the pattern. Each remembering makes the next remembering more accessible. Each return to I am makes that return more natural. Until eventually, you stabilize in God state consciousness, not as peak experience, but as baseline reality. What I'm about to reveal will show you why your awakening to the God state isn't just personal transformation, but part of something vast. The universe becoming conscious of itself through billions of individual perspectives simultaneously recognizing their divine nature. You're not alone in this recognition. Across the planet right now, millions of humans are simultaneously awakening to I am consciousness. Some through spirituality, some through science, some through suffering, some through spontaneous recognition. But all are arriving at the same truth. There's only one consciousness, and it's waking up to itself through every individual awareness that reaches the frequency where recognition becomes possible. This is what spiritual traditions call the Great Awakening, or the Shift, or the New Earth. It's not metaphor, it's God, which is what we all are, collectively remembering itself through the multitude of forms it's temporarily expressing as. And every individual who awakens makes it easier for others to awaken because we're not actually separate. We're one field recognizing itself through apparent multiplicity. Your role isn't to convince anyone or convert anyone. Your role is to embody I am consciousness so completely that your presence becomes a reminder to others who are ready. Not through teaching or preaching, but simply through being what you are so transparently that others remember what they are. God recognizing itself through you helps God recognize itself through others. The future of human consciousness depends on enough individuals awakening to the God state that critical mass is reached and collective transformation becomes inevitable. You're part of that critical mass. Not because you're special, but because you're ready. Not because you're chosen, but because you've chosen through every experience in your life to prepare for this recognition. Share this message with those who resonate. Every person who awakens to I am consciousness accelerates the collective shift. We're building a global network of divine awareness, recognizing itself through human form, and that network is approaching the threshold where humanity as a whole quantum leaps from identification with limitation to recognition of divinity. In the next video, I reveal the advanced protocols for stabilizing permanently in the God state. How to maintain I am consciousness even when circumstances trigger identification with limitation. How to operate as divine awareness while still functioning in human reality. How to embody God consciousness without spiritual bypassing or dissociation. But first, make your declaration. In the comments, write these sacred words. I am that I am. By writing this, the exact phrase God spoke to Moses, you're not affirming something you hope to become. You're declaring what you've always been. You're speaking the name of God from recognition that you are what that name points to. Write it. I am that I am. Then subscribe immediately. Because what's coming will take you deeper into God's state consciousness than any teaching you've encountered. This is quantum reflex, divine awareness, recognizing itself, and living from that recognition. The gateway is open. The God state is accessible. The question is, will you step through? Welcome to your divine nature. Welcome to I am consciousness. Welcome to the God state that you've always been but temporarily forgot. This is quantum reflex. This is God waking up to itself through you. This is the recognition that changes everything. The gateway is yours.